The mail goes through. How fearless men and strong horses served a young nation. Bells rang, bands played, flags waved. The men and women of St. Joseph, Missouri, cheered as a high-stepping brown horse was led out into the street. Young Billy Richardson, with a gun on his back and one at each side, jumped into the saddle. He turned his horse and galloped to the post office. The mail for California had just arrived from the east. It had been brought by train to St. Joseph, where the railway ended. Now the big mail pouch was closed, ready to go farther west. Billy hung it over the front of his saddle. With a wave of his hand, he galloped away on the first westward run of the Pony Express. At about the same hour of that day, April 3, 1860, another mail pouch was put on board a steamship at San Francisco. Then the ship headed up the river to Sacramento, California. There, Billy Hamilton took the pouch and, riding a white horse, started east on the long run to St. Joseph. It was 1,900 miles from Sacramento to St. Joseph. No telegraph lines or railways reached across the lonely miles of mountain and desert country. Once each month a stagecoach made the long trip from Missouri to California if the Snows, Indians and highwaymen let it go through. Mail could also go from New York by sea to Panama, by land across the Isthmus of Panama and then by sea again to San Francisco. This trip took from 3 to 4 weeks. By 1860 500,000 people were living west of the Rocky Mountains. Some had come to seek gold, others to get new land for farms. For a long time, these pioneers had been asking the government in Washington, D.C., for a faster mail service, but nothing had been done to start one. So now they had started their own mail service, the Pony Express. Billy Hamilton rode the first 20 miles of his trip eastward in 59 minutes. Changing horses every 5, 10, or 15 miles, he galloped on to a place called Sportsman's Hall. There Hamilton threw the brown mail pouch over the saddle of the next rider, young Warren Upson. Upson carried the pouch over the mountains into Nevada. In those high mountains, the Pony Express Company had to keep mules moving along the trail to clear away the piles of snow that were sometimes 30 feet high. The third rider, Bob Haslam, carried the pouch across the desert of Nevada to Fort Churchill. The riders meet. So, from horse to horse, from rider to rider, from station to station, the mail went through. Somewhere near Salt Lake City, the rider from the west met the rider from the east. They passed at a gallop with a wave of the hand. Because of weather conditions, the mail going west made that first trip in the shorter time, 9 days and 23 hours. It arrived in San Francisco a little after midnight. But San Francisco was used to late hours. From theaters, eating places and homes, people rushed into the streets. Bells rang, people cheered. One excited lady took off her hat, a beautiful hat that had cost a lot of money, and tied it on the pony's head. The Pony Express had brought the mail in half the time of earlier overland trips. And it was 3 times faster than mail carried by steamship. The new service was organized by Russell, Majors and Waddell, a well-known express company of Leavenworth, Kansas. Everything had been carefully planned. The company had established 190 stations along the way, with 400 men employed at the stations. Good riders, fast horses. The company also had bought 480 horses. They were worth about $200 apiece, the best horses that money could buy. The 80 riders were the best in the West. They earned from $50 to $150 a month apiece. Without help from the government, the company had to defend its horses and lonely stations from Indians and highwaymen. Yet the Pony Express riders had orders not to shoot unless there was no other way for them to save the mail. They were to depend upon their fast ponies and their own good horsemanship. Several of the riders were wounded, and one was killed. The dead man's horse galloped on, without a rider, to the next express station with the mail pouch safe. Most of the riders were small men in their early 20s. Each had to promise that he would use no bad language, take no strong drinks, and stay out of fights with other men of the company. Most of them kept their promises. The company also expected them to stay away from the rough life of the towns in the Old West. And the men lived by this order. Many exciting stories were told about these bold young riders and about the dangers and difficulties they faced. Once, when the next rider was not at the station, Bob Haslam continued for 185 miles through a desert full of Indians. At one station, he stopped to get a little sleep. But the rider with the incoming mail woke him, so he started back with it on his tired horse. Bob was sure he would get a fresh horse at the next station. But when he arrived, he found that the Indians had already been there. The place had been burned down, the stationmaster was dead, and all the horses were gone. On he rode, completing his trip only 3 hours late. Among the young boys who dreamed of getting a job with the Pony Express was 14-year-old William Cody. The stationmaster thought Cody was too young and too small for this dangerous work. He could not know that the boy would grow up to become the famous Buffalo Bill. Young Cody finally got the job. He soon broke all records by carrying the mail for 384 miles without stopping to rest. Once 15 Indians came at him from all sides. He got away only because for 24 miles he rode harder and faster than the Indians. Almost all the young riders had experiences like those of Haslam and Cody. Yet in 18 months the Pony Express riders covered 650,000 miles, carried 30,000 pieces of mail, and lost only one pouch. The mail, then as now, went through. The service started with 1 trip a week. Soon it ran 2 trips a week. News in the United States was important in those months just before the Civil War. The Pony Express carried the news to the West, and Abraham Lincoln was elected president and when he called the country to arms. The great days of the Pony Express ended in October 1861, when telegraph lines coming from both East and West finally met. The Pony Express had carried the mail and the news for only a year and a half, but it had played an important part in history. It earned no money for its organizers. Indeed, they lost heavily. They had spent $100,000 for equipment and $30,000 a month to run the Pony Express. They had lost about $400,000 when the service ended. But the country had not lost. The carrying of mail and news was speeded up at an important moment in history. The Pony Express earned a hard-fought victory over time and difficulties with the help of bold young men.